Hi, I'm Jerry Bowyer. You're watching the Eagle Investing Network, and I do hope you'll subscribe and also share this video with other people who want to learn about macroeconomics, financial economics, finance, investing, all the things you know to function in this world as an investor and as an entrepreneur. We're going to look at some new information that's just come out from the Congressional Budget Office. This is the bipartisan group. Remember, the Republicans control one house, the Democrats control another. So this is a consensus, and it kind of represents the government consensus. So in some ways, it's a little distorted, and things might be worse than they're acknowledging, but it's kind of meaningful when they're acknowledging their problem because they're the government. And generally, they've been covering up some of the problems. So this is the new CBO report, and we're going to look at the data. This is from their budget outlook. So let me make clear what this is. Time, 1972 to 2032. Obviously, this is not being recorded in 2032. If you're watching in 2032, I'm really glad that these videos have staying power, but at that point, this is a forecast. So everything to the right of the ... is projected. It's a prediction. This is percent of gross domestic product. So this is the percent of the output of the economy focused on end products, not the whole economy. That would be gross output. Maybe someday the Congressional Budget Office will do this with gross output, with Dr. Mark Skousen's gross output statistic, which is the whole economy. But for now, we'll have to deal with this. So the dark purple is the primary deficit or surplus. It doesn't count interest. This is just how much more we got as tax revenues as a federal government than we spent on goods and services. The lighter purple is the net interest outlays. So the difference between them, like this minus the kind of adding this together, that's the total deficit or surplus. So this black line is our surplus or deficit, mostly deficit, varies, moment of surplus, is our mostly deficit. Above here is a surplus, under here is a deficit since 1972. That's the total thing. Now, these colored lines break it up into the part that is the main deficit, goods and services, as opposed to the interest that we pay. All right, and so obviously we see severe deficit spending in and around the Great Recession, which was really a short depression. We see severe deficits in and around the COVID shutdown. Now, recently, President Joe Biden, I don't mean to get too political here because, some of these big deficits were under the Republican President Trump. But recently, President Biden said, well, we've overseen the biggest decrease in the deficit in American history. Well, not really. He's looking at the total dollar amount. It's not adjusted for the size of the economy. It's not adjusted for inflation. And what we see here is, yeah, that's a decrease, but that's not so good. This is nothing to brag about, this level of deficit, just because that was so terrible. It is still a very large deficit as a percent of gross domestic product. Now, the forecasts are that it's going to go down a lot. Of course, that will not be the case if we have a recession, will it? Recession, here we see recessions increase deficits. Recession, right? Recessions increase deficits. Why? Because when you have a recession, tax revenues go down, but government doesn't tighten its belt like we do. Government spends more to stimulate things. Of course, all they do is stimulate government. So there's something else really important here, and we see here net interest outlays double as a percentage of GDP over the projected period, further increasing total deficits. So what does that mean? This is the interest portion. This is the interest portion of the deficit now. Look what's going to happen. The interest portion is going to get twice as big. So this is a situation where you can't get rid of the interest. You can stop buying goods and services, but you have to pay your interest. Otherwise, you default. And so what's happening here is we get to the point where there is so much debt accumulated over all these deficits that we end up, see, this is all of this is borrowing. Everything under the zero line is borrowing. but we're going to end up borrowing to pay the interest on past borrowing, right? This huge debt spike is so big that after that, the interest rates and interest becomes really a half to almost a majority of the deficit spending. It's kind of like you have a credit card and you borrow on the credit card to go out to the restaurants, and you borrow on the credit card to buy a washing machine, and you borrow on a credit card to pay for vacations. But at some point, most of the borrowing on the credit card is to pay the interest on the previous borrowing on the credit card. They're also pointing out the aging of the population, which means less paying into taxes, and the rising cost of healthcare. More people in the cart being pulled along in this case in the Medicare cart and in the Social Security cart, who are drawing down rather than paying into. So all of these things amount to a serious increase in the deficit. Again, none of this has baked a recession into the cake. As of this point, I'd call it a 50-50 chance that we're in a recession now. So if it turns out we're in a recession, these things will have to be revised downward. Worse. Also, we're going to look at this later, the interest rate assumptions here. This is the interest amount as a percentage of GDP. But if interest rates rise a lot, obviously the interest payments rise a lot. And so obviously the interest payments as a percentage of the total economy would rise a lot. So we're going to look at that a little bit later and see how some of these factors like interest rates and aging are affecting the budget outlook and also the economic outlook. I'm Jerry Bowyer. This is the Eagle Investing Network. Have you subscribed yet? Time to subscribe. Go do that now. And also, if you think somebody else might benefit from this, maybe your kids need to know what they're up against over the next 10 years when it comes to the national debt. Maybe this is something to share with them to affect their voting and their investing. So share it with somebody you care about. Thank you for joining us.